You ever have one of those nights where you wake up at 3 a.m. and you don't even know why? There's no noise. No storm outside. Just that pulse in your chest that says something's wrong. That was me for years. Waking up with that pulse. That invisible alarm clock that didn't care about sleep or sanity. The truth? It wasn't insomnia. It was obsession. I was chasing something, someone, and the longer I ran, the less I remembered what I was running for. I want to start this story where the air still smelled like gasoline and rain. There was a night, God, I can still see it, where I sat in my car in the parking lot of a diner just off Route 83. The rain was so loud it sounded like applause, like the universe was clapping for the mess I'd made. My hands were trembling around a styrofoam cup of cold coffee, and my reflection in the window looked like a ghost. That night I told myself I wasn't broken. I told myself I was getting even. You see, revenge doesn't announce itself with drama. It doesn't come with thunder or knives or wild declarations. It starts quietly. It starts with a story you tell yourself about justice, about being righted, about being seen. For me, it started with a betrayal. His name was Peter. We met when I was 24, full of caffeine, ambition, and this foolish idea that love could make you fearless. He was charming in that offhand, distracted way some people are. The kind of man who never seemed to be fully in the room with you, but you kept chasing his eyes anyway, hoping he'd stay long enough to mean something. And I thought I was different. I thought I could be the one he wouldn't walk away from. He was a writer too, though not the kind who finished things. He loved beginnings, the smell of a blank page, the first spark of an idea. But he didn't believe in endings. I remember once he told me, "Endings ruin things, Janet. They make beauty finite." And I laughed. Because at 24 I thought that was poetic. At 32 I realized it was just an excuse for never taking responsibility for the damage you cause when you leave. The end came quietly, like all endings do. One text unanswered. One promise postponed. One lie I pretended not to notice. And then the silence. There's a kind of silence that isn't peace. It's punishment. It's that hollow, echoing quiet where you start replaying everything you said, everything you missed, every warning sign that you dismissed as just stress. I learned that night that heartbreak doesn't sound like crying. It sounds like the click of a door you didn't expect to close. But this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's about what heartbreak turns you into. Because after Peter left, something shifted in me. Something small, sharp, and dangerous. I remember thinking, he can't just get away with it. He can't just walk away like I was disposable. Like I was a page in one of his unfinished stories. That's when the revenge began, not against him at first. Against the version of me that believed in people like him. I became cold. Methodical. The kind of woman who never cried in public, never flinched, never showed she cared. I threw myself into my work, into success, into perfection. Every accolade, every deal, every applause. It wasn't joy I felt. It was defiance. I was saying, look what you lost. Look who you underestimated. But here's the cruel trick about revenge. It's addictive, but it's not satisfying. Every win just makes you hungrier. Every compliment feels like proof, but the hunger keeps growing because it's not validation you're craving. It's redemption. And redemption can't come from anyone else's downfall. Years passed. My name started showing up in places I'd once dreamed about. Interviews, podcasts, panels. People called me formidable. Unflinching. No one called me kind. No one called me happy. I'd walk into rooms and feel this strange split inside me. The outside version of me looked so composed, so untouchable. But inside, I was still that girl in the rain-soaked car, waiting for applause that never came. My friends, what few I had left, stopped asking how I was. I think they already knew the answer. There's this one memory that always sticks. It was at a book launch in Chicago. My publicist, Nadia, God bless her, had organized this whole event. Standing room only. Cameras, champagne, the whole bit. And in the middle of the celebration, with everyone smiling, I caught sight of my reflection in the window again. That same reflection from years ago. The ghost was back. And I realized, I had spent years trying to prove I wasn't broken, but all I'd done was polish the cracks. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like rage. It looks like resilience performed for an audience. You start saying things like, I'm fine, and it made me stronger, because you're terrified of what would happen if you said it still hurts. You convince yourself that success is healing, that if you just keep achieving, the pain will finally shut up. But pain doesn't leave when you ignore it. It just changes shape. Mine started showing up in small ways. Forgetting birthdays, avoiding calls from my mother, staying up until 4 a.m. just to feel the world go quiet enough for me to think. And there were moments, tiny, unbearable moments, where I thought maybe he was right about endings. Maybe some things aren't supposed to close neatly. Maybe the ache is permanent. I think the hardest part wasn't losing Peter. It was losing the version of myself who still believed people were good. There was a night, this was maybe 3 years after we broke up, when I saw him again. Not in person. Just a photo. Someone had tagged him in a post. He was smiling, his arm around someone new. She had that same look I used to have. The look of someone who still believed she was special. And for a split second my chest burned. Not from longing, from rage. That quiet, simmering rage that tastes metallic like blood. And I hated myself for feeling it. Because that was the moment I realized revenge had rewired me. I didn't want him back. I wanted him to hurt. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be invisible. That's when I understood. Revenge isn't about justice. It's about control. It's what you reach for when everything else has been taken from you. And once you taste it, it's hard to stop. I wish I could tell you that I hit rock bottom and had some grand revelation. That I woke up one day, stared into the mirror and decided to choose peace. But that's not how it happened. It happened slowly like erosion. Little pieces of me just wore away. I started canceling plans. I stopped laughing. I avoided places that reminded me of softness. Cafes, bookstores, old friends. The world became sharp edges and deadlines. And then one night I got a call from my sister. She said, "You've missed 3 Christmases, Janet. What are you chasing that's more important than love?" And I didn't have an answer. Because by then I wasn't chasing Peter anymore. I was chasing a ghost of myself. The one I thought I'd lost. You ever hold on to something so tightly that your hands start to ache? But you can't let go because you're terrified of what your hands will feel like when they're empty? That was me. And I remember the exact night the ache finally broke me. I was in my apartment in New York. It was winter, the kind of cold that bites at your bones even inside. I was editing a draft at 2 a.m. trying to distract myself, and I looked around the room. Every surface was covered in notebooks, empty coffee mugs, and awards. And I felt nothing. Not pride. Not joy. Just nothing. And that emptiness scared me more than heartbreak ever did. Because at least heartbreak meant I could still feel. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark. And I said out loud, "I'm tired." Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that lives in your bones. And for the first time in years I cried. Not the cinematic kind of crying. The ugly, choking, red-eyed kind. The kind that doesn't end. It just drains you until you can breathe again. That was the moment revenge finally loosened its grip. Not because I forgave him, but because I forgave myself for caring. People always say time heals everything. But that's not true. Time doesn't heal, it just gives you distance. Healing is a choice you have to make every day. And at that point in my life, I hadn't made that choice yet. That would come later. But that night, sitting in the dark, surrounded by everything I thought I wanted, I realized something painfully simple. You can't punish someone out of your heart. You can only love yourself back into it. That's where this story really begins. Not in the betrayal, not in the revenge, but in the emptiness that followed. Because when the noise fades, when the anger quiets, you're left with yourself. And that's the hardest person to face. And I had a lot of facing to do. I think loneliness has a sound. It's not silence. Silence has peace in it. Loneliness sounds like the refrigerator humming at 2 a.m., like the faucet dripping in a dark kitchen, like your own voice saying hello? In an empty room just to make sure you still exist. That's how the months felt after that night. You see, when revenge leaves you, it doesn't just walk out. It takes all your noise with it. The noise you thought was purpose, motivation, strength. It disappears. And you're left with quiet. And quiet, when you've lived years in chaos, feels unbearable. I used to think that if I could just stay busy enough, I could outpace the ache. So I filled my calendar with interviews, flights, meetings, recordings. People called me driven. I was really just running from my own shadow. I remember one morning I was on a plane to Los Angeles. It was an early flight, sun barely up. I'd ordered a coffee I didn't need, and when the plane lifted through the clouds, the light came through the window in that perfect cinematic way, soft gold bleeding into white. And for a second I looked down at the city shrinking beneath me and thought, God, I'm so high above everything. How did I still end up feeling so small? There was a man sitting next to me, reading. His hands looked like my father's, calloused, careful, a little weathered. And it hit me that I hadn't called my dad in months. Not for any particular reason. Just because. I'd convinced myself I was too busy to reach out. But really, I was just afraid that the people who loved me would see through the armor. That's what loneliness does. It convinces you that vulnerability is exposure, not connection. After that flight, I tried to change a few things. Little things. I started walking in the mornings again. Tried eating breakfast at a table instead of over my laptop. But change, real change, it's not a single act. It's 1,000 tiny acts of defiance against who you used to be. And I was still losing most days. I'd still open my inbox before I'd open the curtains. Still check my metrics before checking in on myself. Still measure my worth in numbers. Sales, followers, views. Success had become my only language. And I was fluent, but illiterate in everything else. There was this afternoon, I can still smell it, that mix of printer ink and rain and stale coffee. I was in a studio downtown recording a narration for someone else's story. Halfway through the session, I caught my reflection again, through the soundproof glass this time. You ever look at yourself and not recognize the person staring back? My hair was immaculate, my tone perfectly even. Every emotion rehearsed, controlled. I looked professional. But my eyes were gone. There was no spark, no mess, no life. Just this exhausted, almost haunted stare. And it terrified me. Because I'd spent years mastering the art of sounding real without being real. That night, I called my old friend Lena. She's one of those people who laughs with her whole body, the kind of laugh that makes you remember what oxygen tastes like. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. When she answered, she said, "Janet, are you okay?" And I remember freezing, because no one had asked me that in so long I didn't even know how to respond. So I lied. I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just been busy." And she said, "You don't sound fine." Then there was this pause, long, unbearable silence. Finally, she said, "Do you ever miss yourself?" And I couldn't speak. Because that was it. That was exactly it. I missed myself. The me who laughed too loud. The me who stayed up talking about ideas instead of achievements. The me who loved without keeping score. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I wanted to find her again. But here's the thing about healing. It's humiliating at first. Feels like losing. Because you start realizing how much of your pain you built your identity around. I had to unlearn so much. The way I equated silence with strength. The way I mistook attention for affection. The way I thought forgiveness meant letting someone else off the hook when really, it was about setting yourself free. It's messy work. There's no montage, no triumphant music. It's just sitting in the discomfort of your own mind and saying, okay, let's start again. And some days I couldn't. There was a winter when everything went gray. I don't mean the sky, I mean everything. The food, the people, the days. They all blurred into the same colorless stretch of hours. I'd wake up, go through the motions, do the interviews, answer the emails, but inside I was this echo chamber of numbness. That's the thing about emotional burnout. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly extinguishes you. And when you're finally alone long enough, the quiet starts to talk back. One night, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment with my laptop open, scrolling through old photos. There was one picture of me and Peter, back when we were in New Orleans. I could smell the café au lait, the powdered sugar, hear the saxophone echoing from a street corner. We looked happy. And it made me sick because I couldn't tell if we were happy or if we were just pretending to be. So I deleted the photo. But what I didn't expect was what came next. I kept scrolling and deleting. One by one. Every photo that reminded me of who I used to be. And when I was done, I sat there, laptop closed, realizing I had just erased my own history. That's what loneliness does. It convinces you that forgetting is safer than remembering. But memory, even when it hurts, is what anchors you. And for a while I was completely unmoored. I started seeing a therapist not long after that. Her name was Mariah. Soft voice, kind eyes, always smelled faintly of citrus tea. At first, I treated therapy like an interview. I'd show up polished, composed, performative. She'd ask how I was feeling and I'd say, productive. She'd raise an eyebrow. That's not a feeling. And I'd laugh it off. But deep down I knew she was right. Because I hadn't been feeling in years. I'd been performing. There was one session I'll never forget. She asked me, "What do you think revenge gave you?" I said, "Control." She nodded. And what did it cost? And before I could answer, my throat just closed. My body answered before my mind did. Cost everything. My peace. My softness. My connection to people who cared about me. My ability to rest without guilt. And I remember whispering, "It cost me." Mariah said, "Then maybe it's time to stop trying to win and start trying to come home." I didn't understand what she meant then. But I would. Healing is boring. That's something no one tells you. It's not epiphanies and breakthroughs every day. It's drinking water. Making your bed. Saying no when you mean no. Relearning how to exist without needing to prove your worth. It's lonely at first. Because the old version of you, the one who thrived on chaos, doesn't go quietly. There were nights I wanted to text Peter again just to feel something. Even anger felt better than absence. But every time I stopped myself. And that tiny pause, that was progress. Not glamorous, not dramatic. Just quiet, invisible progress. One night I went for a walk by the Hudson. The city lights were reflecting off the water like broken glass, and the air smelled like rain and concrete. And I thought, maybe that's what healing looks like. Broken things reflecting light. I leaned on the railing watching the waves lap at the rocks, and for a second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not happiness. Not relief. Just stillness. And it was enough. Sometimes people ask me, "How did you move on?" And I always say, I didn't. I moved through. Because moving on implies distance, like you've left the pain behind. But moving through means you carried it, faced it, learned from it, and kept walking anyway. And there's no finish line. No final moment where you say, "I'm healed." You just start living differently. You start caring more gently. You start apologizing faster, forgiving slower, resting without guilt. You start realizing that peace isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, and often overlooked. The hardest part of healing is realizing that no one's coming to save you. No apology, no closure, no grand gesture will undo what's been done. You have to save yourself. Over and over. In the small moments no one sees. That's where redemption hides. Not in perfection, in persistence. By the time spring came that year, something in me had softened. I started spending more time outside. Cooking again. Reading without annotating. Calling my family back. I'd sit on my balcony some nights and watch the city breathe, and I'd think, this is what being alive feels like. Not the constant chase. Not the applause. Just breath. And for the first time I didn't feel alone in it. Because I realized loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of connection with yourself. And little by little I was finding my way back. I wish I could say that was the end of it. That I rebuilt myself and never looked back. But healing doesn't erase the scars. It just teaches you how to live with them. Mine still aches sometimes. Especially when it rains. But I've learned to stop hating the ache. Because it's proof that I survived. And survival, even when it's quiet, is still a kind of triumph. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after devastation. Not the cinematic kind. No music swelling, no sunlight breaking through clouds. It's quieter than that. More fragile. It's the sound of your own breath when you realize the world didn't end even though it felt like it should have. That's where I found myself. After the anger, after the emptiness, just there. Breathing. Existing. Watching my life stretch out in front of me like a road I didn't remember paving. And I thought, all right, Janet. Now what? The first year of healing felt like walking through fog. Every step small, uncertain, but forward. Always forward. I wasn't chasing anymore, but I wasn't at peace either. I was learning how to be. It's harder than people think. Learning how to live without an enemy. Because revenge gives you purpose. Anger gives you energy. And when those leave, you're left holding a stillness that feels almost unbearable. I used to fill that silence with noise. Podcasts, work, scrolling through social media until my thumb went numb. Anything to avoid sitting with myself. But Mariah, my therapist, once told me, stillness isn't emptiness, Janet. It's presence. It's what's left when the pretending stops. And she was right. There's this memory I go back to often. It was late summer. One of those August evenings where the air smells like heat and grass and something faintly sweet. I was walking through Central Park. I didn't have anywhere to be. No meeting, no agenda. Just walking. There was a group of kids flying a kite on the hill and I stopped to watch them. The kite was red, dipping and rising against the pale sky. They were laughing. That unfiltered, reckless kind of laughter you only have when you still believe the world is kind. And for the first time in years I smiled. Not politely. Not for anyone else. Just because. That's when I realized I hadn't lost my capacity for joy. I'd just forgotten how to recognize it. It doesn't always come as fireworks. Sometimes it's just a red kite on a summer evening. When I got home that night I sat at my desk, the same one I'd spent years using as a shield, and I started writing again. Not for work. Not for an audience. Just for me. The words came out clumsy, uneven, but they were honest. I wrote about the rain, the anger, the ache. I wrote about Peter, not to blame him but to release him. And as I wrote I noticed something. I wasn't shaking. My hands were steady. My heart was quiet. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't roar, it exhales. A few months later I ran into Peter again. Not planned. Just one of those cruel coincidences the universe seems to enjoy. I was at a book fair in Seattle signing copies, smiling for photos when I looked up, and there he was. He looked older. Softer. Time had done its quiet work on him too. For a moment I froze. The old reflex came back. That tightness in the chest, that electric pulse of how dare you exist so casually after what you did to me. But then something strange happened. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. Not coldness, just distance. Like looking at an old photograph and realizing it's part of your story, but no longer your present. He smiled, hesitant. "Janet," he said like it was a question. And I just nodded. "Hey, Peter." He said something about being proud of me. About how far I'd come. And I remember thinking, you have no idea how far that distance really is. I didn't owe him forgiveness. But in that moment I realized, I didn't need vengeance either. I didn't need anything from him at all. And that, more than any apology, was freedom. After that, something subtle shifted. I started noticing small things again. The taste of morning coffee, the sound of rain on the fire escape, the warmth of my cat curling against my leg when I read. Those tiny, almost invisible moments that make a life. I began writing differently too. Softer, slower, less about grandeur and more about grace. And people noticed. They said my work felt more human now. More vulnerable. I used to think vulnerability was weakness. Now I know it's the truest kind of strength. Saying I survived but it still hurts sometimes. Because that's real. That's what connects us. My sister came to visit one weekend. We were sitting on the porch drinking iced tea and she looked at me, really looked, and said, "You seem lighter." And I laughed. "I've been letting go." She smiled. "You don't have to let go of everything, you know. Some things you can just hold differently." And I thought about that all night. Because she was right. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to carry it without cutting yourself on the edges. The memories, the mistakes, the people who hurt you, they don't vanish. They just take up less space in your chest. I still have bad days. Days where the old bitterness knocks at the door, asking to be let back in. And sometimes I let it sit with me for a while. I pour it some tea, ask it what it wants. Usually it just wants to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be known before it leaves again. That's how I live with it now. Because healing isn't a clean break. It's a truce. A quiet understanding that some parts of you will always ache. And that's okay. One night a few months ago I gave a reading in Boston. It was a small theater, maybe 100 people. The lights were warm, the air smelled faintly of dust and perfume. During the Q&A someone asked, "If you could go back and stop yourself from chasing revenge, would you?" And I remember pausing, really thinking. Finally I said, "No." Because I wouldn't be who I am without it. But I would hold that younger version of me a little closer. I'd tell her she's already enough. She doesn't need to prove her pain to anyone. The room went quiet. And then I saw a few people nodding, eyes glistening. That's when I understood. The most personal pain is often the most universal. We all want to be seen. We all want our hurt to mean something. But sometimes the meaning isn't in the hurt itself. It's in what we build after it. These days my life is smaller, simpler. I wake up early. I walk by the river. I cook more than I order in. I call my parents. I take naps. No one writes articles about that kind of life. It doesn't trend. It doesn't go viral. But it feels honest. And honest after everything is enough. I still write, of course. But the words come from a different place now. Not from anger. Not from the need to prove. But from this quiet gratitude that I'm still here, that I made it through. Some nights, I reread the old journals I kept during the revenge years. They're full of rage and righteousness and hurt. I don't judge that version of me anymore. She was surviving the only way she knew how. But now I write letters to her, small ones tucked in between pages. Hey, I write. You made it out. You did the hard thing. You kept going even when you didn't want to. I'm proud of you. Because I am. If you take anything from this story, let it be this. You can waste years chasing justice for a wound that will never close the way you want it to. You can burn your hands trying to return pain to the people who gave it to you. And in the end, you'll find yourself alone in a room full of trophies that don't talk back. But if you slow down, if you sit with the ache, tend to it instead of fighting it, you'll find something underneath all that noise. Peace. Not perfect peace. Just enough to breathe. Enough to build. Enough to love again. I spent years chasing revenge. It left me with nothing but echoes. But when the echoes faded, I found something I hadn't heard in years. My own voice. And it wasn't angry. It wasn't broken. It was just mine. And maybe after everything, that's all I ever needed. So if you ever find yourself standing in the ruins of what someone did to you, don't rebuild for them. Rebuild for yourself. Because revenge may make you feel powerful. But forgiveness, even if it's just forgiving yourself, that's what makes you whole.